Hello, dear friends. Very important events are happening these days in Venezuela. There are huge implications for all the world, and that's why we are going to talk today about these events. And because it is a huge disinformation in mainstream media, we are here in Romania. I know the situation in European Union, but also in United States, there are a whole bunch of lies. And that's why I invited the person that could bring us very objective and accurate information. And our guest today is Dr. Francisco Dominguez. Hello, Francisco. Glad to see
Hello, how are
you.
you? Nice. Thanks for having me on.
Uh, Thank you very much for coming. I'm going to tell a few words about our guest today. So, Mr. Francisco, you are specialized in political and economic analysis of Latin American countries. You are the National Secretary of the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign in UK, but you have also very strong connections with other organizations of solidarity with Venezuela. And I mean organizations from US, from Canada, from Brazil, from all Latin America, of course, from Europe and many other countries. So, Mr. Francisco, we saw within last 6 months at least um, embargo put to Venezuela by United States by Donald Trump administration. And however, the life in Venezuela is and it was very difficult since Hugo Chavez came into power because he wanted Venezuela to be a sovereign country. And few days ago, President Maduro have been captured by special American forces. It was action like Rambo, like in the movies, but there are many marks. How did this operation could be put in place? Because it seems it was some traitors also in Venezuela. I don't know. Maybe you are going to tell us. And yesterday we saw another escalation. Two oil carriers from Russia have been captured, have been seized by United States also. So how do you see the situation, and especially please tell us how which is the situation now in Venezuela? Is the leadership of Venezuela obey to United States, or they keep maintaining the sovereignty of the country?
Yeah. After answering this directly, I want to go back to the more general thing to contextualize. But thank you for inviting me. The situation is like this. Once President Maduro and his wife were kidnapped, violently kidnapped by US forces, who, in order to get to them, had to assassinate in cold blood about 40 bodyguards. And this was preceded by creating confusion with 152 military aircraft, including helicopters, F-35, F-32, which are very high-level, military warplanes. And they bombed four cities, mainly military installations as well as some civilian installations. And many of the people, the civilians who died, were blown to pieces while they were sleeping. So that gives you an idea of, the brutality and ruthlessness of it. And then the two of them were brutally treated. It is their lawyer in New York said publicly that Celia Flores, the wife, had broken ribs, and apparently President Maduro has also broken ribs. She has a black eye plus band-aid in many places. They dragged her through the floor and so on. So, it was that sort of thing. Then from there, once they got them, they flew them into the USS Iwo Jima, which is one of the US destroyers that was in the Caribbean Sea. And then from there, they were flown into New York. In there, they made an appearance in the Brooklyn court in New York, where the president said that, I'm the constitutional president of Venezuela, and I consider myself to be a prisoner of war. I'm an innocent man, I haven't done anything wrong, and that's where things are. So this is the most outrageous, disgusting, vicious attack by a power such as the United States against a country which has done nothing to them. Venezuela as a country, the government of Venezuela as a government, President Maduro as president, they're totally innocent of having done anything against the United States. And the United States violated absolutely every bit of international law. You look for it, and they have done it. So it was extremely important to restore normality. And as a consequence of that, the State Council and the National Assembly and the Supreme Court met very quickly, and they discussed what to do, and they followed the Constitution. And they decided to appoint the Vice President, Delcy Rodriguez, as interim president. And then she was sworn in. She got the support of all the key institutions and very strong support from the armed forces. There's been no fracture at all between the political leadership and the military leadership, and there's been no fracture in the military forces as well, and the militias are there, intact as they were. So that was the first thing that they did. They did it very quickly, and that was very good. She made very strong statements saying that as far as she was concerned, she's interim president, and therefore the only genuine, legitimate president of Venezuela is President Maduro. They're going to do everything they can to bring it back, including, of course, his wife. And for as long as that is the case, she's going to be interim. This is constitutionally quite an important legal consideration, because if she were to have been appointed president as such, in replace of President Maduro rather than in an interim capacity, then they would have to organize elections, which in the circumstances would have been a gift to the United States that we have used the extreme right-wing opposition. So the country is coming back to normality. There have been huge demonstrations, huge, inside Venezuela itself, demanding, our president, we're outraged, this is disgusting, we're not a colony, we're not going to accept this. So there is a militant attitude, and that's where things are. And the United States statements from Trump, Marco Rubio, and others are suggesting that their strategy is to turn Venezuela into a colony. So we'll see how far that goes. That's the current situation now.
Mr. Francisco, please tell me if you can estimate how percentage of Venezuelan population supports Maduro, because there are different opinions. Some say they are 50-50, some say they are more pro-Maduro, some or less Maduro.
Well, if you look at all the elections, 33 of them, which we have studied every time, the opposition has a strong base of support, including popular support. The difficulty they have is that every time there is an election which they lose, they do not recognize it. So they throw doubt on the result of the election. But it tends to work like this. The opposition gets, when it loses every time, which is about 31 times out of 33, they get between 35 to 55%. Sorry, 35 to 45%. That's more or less their base. Overall, that's a sort of solid floor of support they have. The Venezuelan government, the Chavistas, tend to get between 45 to 55 every time they win. And they've gone so far. I remember in 2006, they managed to get 63%. So that's the reality of it. So the opposition does have support. And the reason why it does have support, because, historically, in 1999, the changes that Chavez introduced were too radical. Many sections of the population were a bit shocked by it. So that was number one. Number two, there had been a huge amount of propaganda. The church, the media, and so on, which the opposition controlled 85% of it, plus intervention by the United States, and then under President Maduro particularly, the sanctions actually had a tremendous impact on discontent. But what is interesting regarding that discontent, in the last election, the opposition got 41%. I was an international observer to that election, and this electoral system of Venezuela is the best in the world. There is no question about it. It's impossible to organize fraud. So they got 41%, they claim 80%, which is just completely ridiculous. They produce a website with fake information, which discredited completely their claim. So the situation is the following. Once they lost and they said they were going to organize an insurrection and they won the election and so on, Maria Corina Machado and the extreme right-wing opposition went to call for the population to come out and stage demonstrations to destabilize the country in a sort of insurrectionary manner that we have seen in Eastern Europe many times. And the amount of population that turned up was very, very small. I think in one of the demonstrations, which was the biggest, was about 1,000 people. This is no exaggeration. There's no me doing propaganda. 1,000, we have the pictures. And then a few other demonstrations they tried to organize where they called the population, hundreds, 200 turned up, which means the following. Obviously, people were unhappy because of the difficulties that the country was going through as a result of the sanctions, but they were not prepared to engage in insurrectionary tactics. So they wanted to express their discontent to the government, to say, do something about it, which the government couldn't do much about it because of the blockade. But at the same time, they said, no, we are not going to, they knew. I think most of them know that what happened if the United States takes control of things, then they end up like Haiti, like El Salvador, or like, Ecuador now, where so I think there is this perception in the population. That's why the extreme right wing is so unpopular. Now, interestingly, because of their regular call during this period for a military invasion by the United States, they became even more unpopular. And Trump said that he was asked whether he was going to install Maria Corina Machado. And he said no, because he's not respected in the country and he has no support. So that confirms everything. So what Maduro won in 2024 was absolutely clean, no problem, problematical. But at the same time, on that very occasion, they tried to organize some sort of coup d'etat. They attacked the presidential palace with bullets twice. They attacked, hotels, and they went on the rampage. And I think something like, if I'm not mistaken, something like 27 people died by their hands because they're extremely violent. And the reason they are violent is because young people who are lumpen proletariat, they are given money and they're given a drug which is called, I think it's something called a Deltagon, which is, an amphetamine that drives them crazy. And they confess that they have done it. So I think that's the full picture. So when the Venezuelan government says they won, they won. And just to make a final point to your audience, because I think it's important, in 2015, when the sanctions began to bite really hard, and there was a lot of problems, shortages, queues, and so on, the government lost the National Assembly election. And the opposition nearly won 2/3 of the National Assembly. As soon as the results came out, literally within 1 hour, President Maduro and the government recognized the result immediately without any problem.
Yes, I want to clarify two things. One of it is the strategy that the West is using in order to call the elections in Venezuela as a fraud. So the strategy is that when Venezuela officially invite representatives of European Union, United States, to come to monitorize the process of elections, they refuse. So United States and European Union, they don't want to send anybody. But after the elections, they keep saying that no, it was fraudulent elections. We cannot recognize the result. but they have no proofs. They were invited to participate and they refused. So this strategy is very easy to understand, that they don't want to admit that Venezuela is a democratic country now.
Yeah,
And also another, and I've been there. I've been in Venezuela 3 times. I've been invited through the embassy of Venezuela in Romania. Now the embassy is closed from the beginning of December last year, because they knew that the events will escalate. So I've been 3 times in Venezuela, and I saw how the population are related with the government, with Maduro. There are huge conferences against imperialism, and they shouting that United States is dictatorship, and they want to rule all the world. They want to be a hegemon of the world. So the sentiment of anti-American is absolutely tremendous. And another thing that I think we need to clarify is that um, because of these sanctions, of course, as you said, the population lives in poverty, but the propaganda of the West keeps saying that this very low level of life, quality of life in Venezuela, is because of the incompetence of the government of Maduro
yeah,
and Chavez previously. So it's obvious, when it is such a strong embargo to Venezuela, they cannot sell oil, and they cannot buy prime necessity materials. Of course, the life is very tough, but it is because of the embargo, not because of the incompetence of Maduro. So I want to, if you want to make some
yeah.
other comments on this,
On the question of the elections, I think it's quite important this point. Not only they had the best election in the world, not only when they lose, they recognize the results immediately, the government, and when they win, the opposition never does, which is clear. And then the international media and the United States and the European Union go for lies. What is interesting is this: every time the opposition has lost the election and has claimed fraud, they never, not once, have presented any formal complaint saying, we went to this particular state, we went to this particular polling station, we have this evidence here, this is what happened in this place, and here is the evidence. There is no evidence, no, zero, never, ever, not once have they presented, formal complaints, because there are all sorts of bodies, international observers of various kinds over the years in elections in Venezuela. They could easily have, the Organization of American States at some points, the Carter Center at some other points, and a few others. They could have said, this is our information, we have presented this complaint, here is the evidence to demonstrate that it was fraud, and we want you to do something about it. They never did. All they did every time, they went immediately to the media to denounce fraud without any evidence. So far, the opposition has never once presented this, so that's a clear indication of what is going on. When it comes to the question of the sanctions, the US blockade is so comprehensive. The intention was to asphyxiate, strangle the economy. They prevented the country from selling oil. They prevented the country from selling gold. They prevented the country from engaging in international financial transactions of every kind. They froze all the accounts internationally and in the United States. They took away property such as the Citgo company, which is a refinery of oil, which belonged to Venezuela, plus 4,000 petrol stations that belonged to Venezuela. They took that away. In Europe, they froze and they controlled all the assets of Venezuela, such as in the case of the Bank of England, 31 tons of gold that were placed in custody before Chavez, actually. The Bank of England was the most secure place to actually put your wealth. Now I think it's gone, that prestige is gone completely. In total, it is estimated that the amount of assets frozen, taken, confiscated, and so on is in the region of $40 to $60 billion. Just to give an idea to our audience, what that means. The GDP of Nicaragua is $14 billion. So $60 billion is a huge amount. That's number one. Number two, the blockade went as far as to prevent Venezuela from importing anything. So, for example, there was a Mexican company that was exporting food to Venezuela because they had tremendous difficulties in that time. The United States went against that company and bankrupted it. So we made sure that it stopped it, which, that stopped. And then many other companies that were prepared to do business with Venezuela, stopped doing business with Venezuela because of that. And as a consequence of the blockade on oil, which is a crucial commodity for Venezuela, Venezuela lost 99% of the oil revenues, which contribute 85% to the state finances. And on top of all of that, Venezuela was expelled from the international financial system, which meant the following. If Venezuela were to make a payment for importing anything, not only the bank will not carry out the transaction, the bank will retain the money because the United States will threaten it that if they did, they would be punished in the US market. So it was almost total strangulation. So it's miraculous that Venezuela was able to survive by the time, which is 2020, 2021. President Maduro has managed to reorganize the economy very successfully, has managed to get the country out of the problem. And in 2025 was estimated, we don't have the figures yet, that the economy was going to grow at the rate of something like 7 to 9%, which is one of the highest in the world. So that gives you an idea that the reason why the United States was so desperate about Venezuela was because, their strategy before failed. Their strategy was to get rid of the government, to destroy the government, regime change, in order to control the oil. And now they've gone for a different strategy, which is a military one, which is totally naked. Naked aggression.
Yes. Before going to talk about the current situation, I would like to remind few things about the general situation in previous years. So here on the screen, we have an executive order of former President Barack Obama regarding Venezuela. And as we can see in this image, he considered Venezuela as a national emergency for United States and a so-called unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security of United States. And this is absolutely outrageous, because how can Venezuela become a threat for United States? Venezuela did not attack with nuclear weapons United States. It's not such a big problem with the drugs. I mean, we can admit that there are some transit of drugs in Venezuela, but not as much as becoming a threat for United States, as Donald Trump also stated. And there are all kinds of narratives that keep Venezuela as an enemy of the United States in a very artificial way. But it's useful to observe that it was a study made by Center for Economic and Political Research in Washington. This study was led by Mark Weisbrot and Jeffrey Sachs. Jeffrey Sachs is very well known. And the name of the study was, in 2019, Economic Sanctions as a Collective Punishment, the case of Venezuela. And I would like Mr. Francisco to mention a few of the things that this report said. So the sanctions imposed on Venezuela by the US government since August 2017 has not been on the government, but on the civilian population. They exacerbated Venezuela's economic crisis and made it nearly impossible to stabilize the economy, contributing further to excess deaths. All of this impacts disproportionately harmed the poorest and most vulnerable Venezuelans. So it was not these sanctions in order to put a threat on the government, but they hit population, civil population. And this report said that the sanctions fit the definition of collective punishment of the civilian population as described in both the Geneva and Hague International Conventions. And these sanctions are also illegal under international law and treaties which the United States has signed and would appear to violate US law as well. So it wasn't according to law even with American law. And let's see the effects of these sanctions from this report. So there were more than 40,000 deaths from 2017 to 2018, and more than 300,000 people were estimated to be at risk because of lack of access to medicines or treatment. This includes an estimated 80,000 people with IHIV, HIV, who have not been, well, I jump on the details. 16,000 people with they need dialysis, with cancer, 4 million with diabetes and hypertension, and so on. So the effects were absolutely very difficult, very serious to Venezuelan population. And there were a lot of problems with the electricity because population had no electricity. So it was a hell. The life in Venezuela was a real hell made by United States, and they put blame on Maduro government. So this is the situation in Venezuela. If you want to make some additional comments on this matter.
I want to make the following. I come from Chile and I had to come to London because of the Pinochet dictatorship. And the Pinochet dictatorship in 17 years assassinated 5,000 people. In this case, between 2017 and 2018, they killed literally 40,000 people. But if you continued, 2017, 2018, 2019, including 2020, because the devastation continued. Remember, 2018, 2019 is when COVID took place. So in that period, the broad estimate, the rough estimate is they killed, possibly the sanctions killed between 100 and 150,000 people. That is incredible. That is equivalent to actually dropping bombs on a place. And the most vulnerable are the ones that actually suffer the consequences. And several of the specialists, several of the ambassadors, officials from the United States that were making statements about this, they said, if we need to have them for 3 weeks, we will. If we need to have them for 6 months, we will. If we need to exacerbate them, the best. If they need to stay there for years, then so be it. Because the whole calculation was, they will drive people to such a level of despair that will produce an insurrection, a popular, desperate insurrection, which will justify an external intervention, which is what we're looking for. All this time, since 1999, the United States has been looking for that, created that context, a context of social disturbance that they will use to justify through the Organization of American States or any other international body, or by themselves anyway, just to intervene externally. So that's quite an important dimension to understand. And the key point regarding the description of Venezuela as an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security of the United States has a legal point. The United States, in terms of its own legislation, the government is not entitled to apply sanctions against any other country unless they declare a threat. They declare that country a threat to the national security. That's what they do. That's number one. But number two, when they say it's national security, the president is obliged to declare a national emergency in the United States. because of that threat, which is all fantasy. Nevertheless, technically, that means that the United States is technically at war with that country. So that gives them a scope to do anything they want. So including, for example, putting a price on the president's head, 10 million, 15 million, 25 million, and then 50 million, behaving like gangsters, like in the far west. So that is allowed because of this declaration, this description of this country as a threat to the national security of the United States. Therefore, national emergency is created. And Obama did that in 2015. What Obama did, however, is very important to know this. Obama went for a massive expansion of fracking to get oil out of fracking. And in 2014, the United States was producing something like 4 million barrels of oil a day. As a consequence of fracking, that is to say, massive expansion of it was deliberate, the United States was producing 10 million barrels of oil a day, thereby glutting the market, the oil market, making the price go down quite dramatically. Just to give you an idea of what that meant for Venezuela. Whereas in 2009, 2010, the barrel of oil was $150. As a consequence of Obama's action, by 2020, 2021, the barrel of oil had gone down to 25. So it was horrible for Venezuela already before the sanction. So that was a sort of indirect sanction. So you could see that every single one of them had this conception of asphyxiating the economy, denying the resources to produce a social explosion they could capitalize on by invading it militarily to restore democracy and order, I suppose.
Yes. Mr. Francisco, as you know, I documented the case of Venezuela in one of my books, America's Plans for World Hegemony, and I want to read for our assistance a fragment of my research. So the documents unveiled in my research shows that the support that the United States made during Chavez and after that during Maduro was absolutely tremendous. Support for the groups of opposition in Venezuela, and they invested a lot of millions of dollars. And I am going to tell you a few data.
Sure.
So they supported the so-called democratic opposition in Venezuela and recommends to strengthen the institutions to oppose Chavez authoritarian, they say, regime. And I quote here, in a general view, the authors says that a large majority of 40 to 50 million dollars donated by US and European agencies, you see, not only from United States, but also from European agencies and foundations, is given to the right-wing opposition political parties, Primero Justicia, Un Nuevo Tiempo, and Christian Democrats ultra-conservative party from Venezuela, as well as dozens of NGOs, student groups, and media organizations. They set up there in Venezuela some TV posts that keep telling lies to people, supported and financed by Soros organizations. Among the donor organizations were National Endowment for Democracy, the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, the Open Society Institute, Soros, the Pan American Development Foundation, the Konrad Adenauer Society, and Friedrich Ebert Foundation. The money was used to promote anti-government activities, to fund protest demonstrations, media propaganda, and opposition's electoral campaigns. So this is a fragment. And there are many other information, many data that shows that it was a brutal involvement of US agencies in order to destabilize the government of Hugo Chavez and further on Nicolas Maduro. But of course, we can talk a lot about these topics, but let's move to the present because the events are very explosive. So I understood that after the capture of Nicolas Maduro, now as interim president is Delcy Rodriguez. How do you see the position of Delcy Rodriguez regarding these events, and which are her decisions to Venezuela?
Well, they are under a very difficult situation because the war fleet of the United States is being still deployed in the Caribbean Sea in their coastline. And these involve 16 destroyers, warships with guided missiles, some of them equipped with 1,200, that is to say 1,200 missiles that are medium range. So if one of them were to be in the Panama Canal, it could hit Mexico easily, and it could hit everybody in South America easily. So then there is a nuclear submarine on top of that. Then there are hundreds of, hundreds of B-2 and B-52 bombers, B-1, then cargo planes. And on top of that, the United States has deployed military assets in Puerto Rico, in Trinidad and Tobago, certainly in Guyana, and all around the place. We don't have all the information, but definitely they are there. So the United States is sort of ready to attack Venezuela with everything they have. So Trump said the following. He said, I'm trying to explain, how difficult the situation of the president, the current president, Delcy Rodriguez is. Trump said, we are running the country from Washington. She's got to do what we tell her to do. And if she doesn't, we're going to go for a second strike. That is to say, much worse. And I think what Trump meant, because he said it would be much worse than with Maduro. In other words, we'll assassinate you. I think that's the implication of it. Not only we will not extricate you, we'll not kidnap you, we'll do something much more serious. And then if in the first instance, in the first attack, they attack 4 cities, in the second attack, they're going to go for something much bigger. So that's the context. So in that circumstances, the only possibility that the government has, given that internationally, in Latin America, the relation of forces is not very favorable. It's got the support of Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, and so on, but it's much less strong than it used to be. Then the best thing that anybody in that position can do is to play for time. That is to say, okay, what are we going to do to first of all calm down the situation, and secondly see with this bully that is going to kill me, whether I can get some, win some time. So they said they want the United States want 50 million barrels of oil that are there stored up in Venezuela because they haven't been able to sell them because of the naval blockade. We want to have them. And then the way Rubio and Trump presented this was, we are telling them we're going to have that oil because it's ours. Whereas Delcy Rodriguez from Venezuela said, we're prepared to talk to the United States to sell them oil if they want to. So I suppose what is going on there is some process of negotiation. Trump seems to be not totally keen, although he might change his mind, not totally keen on going for an all-out military attack. Whereas Rubio is quite prepared to go for it. But at the moment, the one who is calling the shot is President Trump. And Trump is totally interested, totally fixated on the oil. I want oil. When he was asked on several interviews, what about human rights? What about democracy? He said, yeah, I want the oil. That's what I want. I think he wants to become a sort of oil baron because he's got very rich, by being president of the United States. That's a possibility that he has. So what she's got to do is, on the one hand, imagine all the jobs she's got to do. Number one, stabilize the situation in the country, calm the population down so there is no panic, calm them in that sense. That's number one. Number two, maintain the unity of all the key political forces in the country, including sections of the opposition that actually are going for a nationalist attitude. We do not want the United States to come in and invade us, which is taking place already. Number three, maintain the rank and file of Chavismo mobilized as much as possible, but ensuring it doesn't go beyond what is complicated, which is not easy. And then negotiate with the United States to say, okay, what can I give you? What can we do so that you don't militarily attack us, while, I suppose what she's thinking is, while we reorganize ourselves, regroup ourselves, and at the same time, which has been already public, her negotiating with Trump the release of President Maduro. That is an interesting dimension, that she said she wants the release of President Maduro. And the reason why I'm saying this is because of all the charges that, that Maduro was charged in the United States with, one of them is drug trafficking, which is, can carry 20 years in prison. And then the other one is narco-terrorism, which is much more serious. But narco-terrorism was always associated to the claim by the United States that there was something called Cartel de los Soles. Cartel de los Soles does not exist. It's just an invention. So the Department of Justice, very peculiarly, I don't know why they've done it, they decided to drop the claim that the Cartel de los Soles exists. It's sort of something which is rather vague. They changed completely their tune. And I'm not sure whether people know, the lawyers that are defending President Maduro and his wife are the same lawyers that defended Julian Assange, which, is quite an important one. They're very experienced. They know what they're doing. So, and they know how to move in these circumstances. So that's the position of Delcy Rodriguez. Extremely difficult one, but at the same time, she got to make connections with Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, and others, and China, and other allies that Venezuela has, to ensure that it gets propped up, supported as much as possible in the circumstances, no more than possible in the circumstances. We'll see how that pans out. Remember, it's only 2 days or 3 days ever since the attack took place, so it's just very premature to draw too many conclusions. But so far, she's been able to actually organize all of that. But one interesting point, not a single demonstration in Venezuela by the opposition, not one. It's totally clear they have no support, especially after this.
But what about mainstream media in Venezuela? Does they are saying the truth about Maduro? I mean, to say it was actually a kind of coup d'etat, an attempt of coup d'etat.
Yeah. I haven't checked the media recently in Venezuela, but most of the media in Venezuela now have moderated enormously. They moderated, particularly in the last 10 years, 5 years. I would say 5 to 10 years. They used to be vicious. They used to be incredibly fanatic. They moderated enormously, and several of them actually disappeared because they entered into confrontation with the government. One of them, one of the newspapers, which was quite popular newspaper, certainly in right-wing circles, accused Diosdado Cabello of being a drug trafficker, just in the pages of the newspaper. So Diosdado Cabello, who is the Minister of Interior, took these people to court and said, this is defamation. He won the case, and then they had to pay him a huge amount of money. So they stripped the building where they had the premises of the newspaper with everything. They took everything away, but they left the building because they couldn't take it away. These people actually emigrated to Spain. So Diosdado Cabello said, this building is mine now because that's my compensation. But, I'm not interested in having it personally. So he decided to get the government to use the building to set up a university of communication, which is the one where they actually use as a media outfit. So the media in Venezuela is the international media, which is the problem. But there is a second dimension, which is the social media, where the lies are really, disseminated massively. The amount of disinformation that I come across in these 3 or 4 days is just incredible. It's all conspiracy theories, conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory. The best thing that anybody can do is try to find something very reliable, such as Telesur in English, for example, such as the Chinese CGTN. They also are very, very good. Then you have the Russian television, Russia Today, and then in the rest of Latin America, only left-wing, properly left-wing newspapers and media are the ones that should be considered. And finally, but that's the problem with the language, is Venezuelan television, national television, which is also covering the news literally every day with a lot of programs, lots of analysis, but you require Spanish for that. But Telesur in English is quite good. Chinese television in English is also very good. Global Times, the Chinese newspaper in English, is also very good, and so on. And these newspapers tend to produce all the information in, I think, 60 languages. So very likely Romanian is one of them, but I do not know.
So even in Venezuela, the disinformation is huge.
It is huge mainly because of the social media, not necessarily because of the mainstream media.
Mhm. Very good. Because when I studied the case of Venezuela in 2019, there were some TV posts established by Soros organizations, and they keep disseminating fake news. And I can tell you that they are doing the same in Romania and in all the European Union.
Yeah.
But what about the support coming from Russia and China? Do you think they will defend Venezuela and the Maduro regime?
The strategy that the Venezuelan government adopted when the war fleet was deployed was to try to defeat this politically rather than in a military confrontation, but prepare themselves militarily as much as possible and show, to the world by deploying military stuff around the place. But the key, because they knew they couldn't win a war, it was to actually defeat it politically, to isolate it internationally. The amount of condemnation that began to emerge during the whole period of the deployment of the war fleet was getting bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. In 2 places, number one, internationally, Latin America, Asia, even in some areas in Europe, but also inside the United States. The Democrats, both in the Congress and in the Senate, not that one should have any illusions, but they were expressing a strong opposition to the war against Venezuela, because their claim was this: if the president is prepared to launch a war against Venezuela, it should come to Congress for approval. That's the constitutional position. And Trump, did all sorts of legal tricks in order not to actually go to Congress, because I think he knew there would be sufficient Democrats and sufficient Republicans, even though a minority both in Congress and in the Senate, to stop it. And interesting, when it came to the question of deploying troops inside the United States, which is connected to this, because it's the same Trump, the Supreme Court, which in the United States is extreme right-wing organization, it's very extreme right-wing, the majority of them are pro-Trump. They ruled that the president does not have the constitutional right to actually deploy military forces in key cities in the United States. So he is deploying federal troops in several cities. He has to withdraw them now. So that it means, I think the Venezuelans were thinking, once this continues to grow and grow and grow, at some point, the Democrats with the Republicans will be able to stop it. But what happened was this: the Republicans, who have the majority, the chair, the majority in the Congress and the majority in the Senate, therefore they're in control of the proceedings, they decided to give the Congress and the Senate a holiday, which was very long, so that a vote could not be taken. And only now, on the 5th and the 6th of January, they began to actually, they began to function again. But the key political thing that we're discussing between the 5th and the 6th was the assault on the Capitol in the United States in 2020 when he lost the election. That was the key focus. So now they're beginning to actually discuss again the question of Venezuela, and it's getting very strong. In fact, I've seen many, I follow US politics daily. I've seen many Democrats who are, quite right wing, members of the Armed Forces committees, members of the Intelligence Committee of the Congress and the Senate, who have been extremely, extremely sharp criticizing the war against Venezuela. And all of them, which, to my surprise, were saying regarding the question of drug trafficking, what I'm telling you now, exactly the same. They said Venezuela has no contribution to this. Venezuela is very little, which I want to say more about this later on. It's got nothing to do with, and there is no justification at all. But even more interesting, his popular base, Trump's base, which is known as the MAGA base, Make America Great Again base, which are, popular, they are beginning to break with him because of the war on Venezuela. And one of the key supporters of Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, went public breaking with him. And he was so rude to her publicly that, that break is beginning to take. And they listen to the MAGA base, listen to people such as Marjorie Taylor Greene. So on the one hand, he getting, beginning to have problems at the level of the Congress, at the parliamentary level, and he's also getting problems within his own party and with his own base. But even better, the amount of demonstrations against him that be taking place at the end of last year and beginning of this year, which has been huge, the No King demonstrations, mobilized more than 7 million people in I don't know how many cities, which has never happened in the United States ever before. So there is a new thing emerging, which is very interesting because of the racism against the Latinos, because of the attack against democracy, and because of his vindictiveness, which is unbelievable. It's getting very complicated. It seems to me that because of that context, he's growing desperate. His government growing desperate. And that's why they're going for all of this they're doing. They're latching out before it's too late.
And another movement that is growing very fast worldwide is the movement that is very much outraged by the genocide in Gaza. And we know that Donald Trump is supporting Netanyahu, but United Nations, even some countries from European Union, maybe some members of the Congress in United States, and Venezuela, all the Latin America, many Arab countries, they are absolutely outraged by the situation, and this movement is already very big. I think you told me before our show that you saw huge protest in Europe, in Spain, somewhere.
Well, regarding Gaza, it's been gigantic everywhere in the world. And in London, in the UK, the organization, Palestinian Solidarity Organization, Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, they've organized every 2 weeks, they organize a large demonstration, particularly in the worst period of the genocide. And they mobilize, 200,000, 500,000, 600,000. They even at a point got something like 2 million. Give and take, more or less, but that's quite huge. The UK is not a country where people mobilize in the streets as the French do. They tend to be much more moderate here. So the level of mobilization here was enormous. In Spain, in France, Portugal, and so on, and in the rest of the world was gigantic, including in the United States itself. That's gigantic. But what is interesting now is that the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign has linked up with the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, with the anti-war movement, which is Stop the War Coalition, and also seeing the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, which are all huge, mass organizations. We're interesting, but we're not that big as they are. And we're together organizing pickets to campaign, against and opposing what Trump is doing. And in that sense, it seems to me that something new is emerging. What is interesting about all of this is in the past when there were big demonstrations, all Caden like me were the ones who moved, who marched, who went to the things. Now it's young people, huge number of young people, very young. So I think they're becoming galvanized, they're becoming politicized, they're beginning to understand how the system works, because they get speakers who tell them what's going on. They read the newspapers, they read pamphlets, they read stuff, and they get quite educated on the issues. And as a consequence of that, they become activists. They become politically active. As a consequence of that, they are securing the future when people like ourselves go, which is quite promising. So the brutality of imperialism, in Gaza, in Venezuela, and elsewhere, is creating the conditions for something new emerging quite substantially. The Labour Party here, the government, Keir Starmer, has a rate of approval of 15%. That gives you an idea. Trump, which is done extremely badly, has a rate of approval of 32%. So it's nearly double. Nearly double. Keir Starmer is so, despised by everybody. So therefore, one of the key things is not only to oppose what is being done to Venezuela, not only to condemn it, not only say it's a violation of international law, but it's also demand the immediate and unconditional release of President Maduro and his wife. But even better than that, we want parliamentarians, certainly in Europe, parliamentarians to actually condemn it and put pressure on them. And we want Keir Starmer, the government, to condemn it because it's a gross violation of international law. And this is an important point in here, I suppose, is important as well. The Prime Minister in the UK has the constitutional and political and moral responsibility to uphold international law, because the UK is signatory to the United Nations Charter, so we can demand it through Parliament, and we have managed to get parliamentarians to ask questions precisely about this to Keir Starmer and the minister, and what they do, they wiggle all about and they don't answer the question, which is quite interesting. So as a consequence of that, we have parliamentarians and other trade unions, national trade unions, national organizations who are supporting our campaign, and that applies to the Palestinian campaign and to any other campaign of politics and of solidarity, which produces good results if you get it right.
Okay, I asked you about Gaza because we can see that these imperialistic colonization policies are going down. All the world is sick about this. They don't want to admit this kind of actions. And, now Donald Trump are using this so-called doctrine, Donroe. So he modified the Monroe Doctrine from 1823, and now he pretend that all the Western Hemisphere belongs to United States. So they can shape all the countries from Latin America, from South America, as they wish. So the oil in Venezuela, the biggest reservoir in the world, belongs to United States. He even pretended that Venezuela stole oil from United States. So the Venezuelan oil, which belongs to Venezuela, he pretended it's his oil. But I don't know. We saw that Donald Trump started to threaten Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, and all the countries that you are going to have the same fate as Maduro. And if you don't obey, we are going to you. We are coming to you. This is pure imperialism, pure policy of colonization. Do you think they will succeed in with such policies in all the Western Hemisphere?
Well, to answer the question, I want to give some context as well after this. But to answer the question is, I would say the following. The possible recolonization or colonization of Latin America using the, what Trump calls the Trump corollary or Donroe Doctrine, the chances of them succeeding will create such level of contradictions. As, you remember neoliberalism from 73 all the way to 1990s, 2000, created such levels of contradictions in Latin America and in the rest of the world that produced huge social movements, that produced the pink tide, where many, many governments between 1999 and 2016 were progressive and left-wing government, even revolutionary governments in Latin America. In one single decade, they did wonderful things in a very short period of time. So the level of contradiction that such colonization will create now, given that the United States is in a very weak economic position, and given the level of brutality would be much worse, it was going to be immensely bigger. So just to give you an example, the right wing won in Bolivia, and President Rodrigo Paz is the new right wing president. He went for austerity and repression immediately, and the consequence is produce immediately a general strike. And in 4 weeks after taking the government, he already has a general strike, and then he has national mobilizations everywhere in 1 week. So this is the possibility. So what I'm trying to say with this, because the United States has nothing to offer to these populations, not to his own population, as well as to the populations of Latin America, then this is going to create a level of contradictions that will make it impossible for the United States to consolidate the political gains it's making. Just to give you another example, the President Daniel Noboa in Ecuador, who is an extreme right wing, the country is basically a narco state. If you want the model of a narco state, that's Ecuador. 70% of the cocaine is produced or is distributed through Ecuador. The level of repression that the government is implementing, inflicting on the population is horrific. The amount of lawfare, the number of leaders in Ecuador that cannot live in Ecuador, Rafael Correa and many others have to live in other places because it's so brutal. And the vice president of the Correa government, Jorge Glass, has been in prison accused of nothing. And they keep inventing things all the time. So even in there, Daniel Noboa was encouraged by the United States to actually go for a referendum to change the constitution to allow the United States to establish military bases in the Galapagos Islands. And he lost the referendum by 65%, which, given the circumstances of the people, that was extraordinary. So they cannot consolidate. And I think the key reason for this in the United States is very close to being on a terminal decline. It's been in decline for ages. Just to give some figures, I may, the United States GDP is 30 trillion. The debt of the United States, 38 trillion. So that means if the United States were to use everything it produces in 1 year, which is huge, gigantic, to pay its debt, it will still owe 8 trillion. 8 trillion is nearly double the combined GDPs of all the Latin American countries. That gives you an idea of what the problem is. The United States spends something like $1 trillion every year in the military budget. And the United States, because it's been deindustrialized as a consequence of locating their companies, over the period of 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020, about 30 years, if not longer, they began to relocate their companies in Mexico, in Haiti, in Central America, in Vietnam, in China. So they deindustrialized the country. So the country began to import huge amount of very cheap goods, which created a trade deficit, which are, extremely worrying. More than 1 trillion of trade deficit per year. So what the United States does every time it produces a trade deficit, when it produces, presents the budget to the Congress, which is a constitutional obligation, it is illegal in the United States, according to United States law, to present a budget which is not self-financed. So therefore, given that the trade deficit is so huge and the military expense is so huge, and the economy grows at a rate of very poor 1 to 2% per year, it doesn't produce enough. The consequence is the United States is forced to increase the debt. So it increases the ceiling of the debt by issuing treasury bonds, which the Japanese, the Chinese, the British, even the population in the United States purchase. So this is a very explosive ticking bomb. Something like between, if you were to look at the 1% and 10% richest person in the United States, they control easily more than 60 to 70% of the GDP of the wealth of the country. And the rest of the 30%, is for the rest of the population. And the number of multi-billionaires is very small. So this is an economy which is not functional. That is to say, in order for the United States to be able to continue to succeed, it needs people who buy the stuff that they produce. Well, they cannot compete with the Chinese. They lost the competitive battle on technology. There are 57 high technology industries in the world. The Chinese have world leadership in 57 of them. That's technology, that's high-speed trains, that's solar panels, you name it, the Chinese are number one. So the United States has nothing with which to give you, just to give you an idea how bad it is. The infrastructure of the country is crumbling away. It's very bad because it hasn't been maintained. The United States is the only high-level country, only advanced country in the world that doesn't have high-speed trains. Everybody else does. Even Morocco has a high-speed train. Spain has a high-speed train. And China is number one, of course. So when it comes to producing good quality stuff, high quality stuff, high technology, innovation, and then green development, the Chinese are number one, and the United States cannot possibly compete. And it's already lost the battle. So the consequence of this is that the oligarchy that rules the United States, the ruling class of the United States, has drawn the conclusion that there is only a way in which they can maintain their supremacy. Because what is an existential threat to them is multipolarity. And as a consequence of this, what they're doing is, sorry about this, as a consequence of this, they decided that they're going to maintain their supremacy by military means. And that's why there is this war against everybody else.
Yeah, it is obvious that United States resorted to this kind of extreme measures, military measures, because they are in the brink of the collapse, economic collapse and financial system collapse. We saw that the dollar is not a competitive value anymore. BRICS countries are using how do you say
currencies.
Yeah, system of payments currencies like yuan, rubla. So they are following the process of de-dollarization. We saw that Saudi Arabia, which was the main partner of United States in the petrodollar system, the one of the founding countries of OPEC, Organization for Oil Export countries. So they get in BRICS, and they don't want to use dollars anymore. So this was a huge problem for United States, and that's why they resorted to this kind of operation, which of course is in break of all the international rules. But we know that they promote the how do they say rule-based order, but rules made by them with double standard. I mean, when we like this kind of rules made by us, we apply, we respect. When we don't like, we don't have to respect. Of course, this is a dictatorial attitude, rhetoric. But also we saw that Venezuela started to make huge business with China in yuans, and the oil carriers of Russia and China are coming to Venezuela to take the oil. But there is this huge armada of United States around Venezuela, and they supporting this embargo. I don't think that they will manage to keep this status for a very long time, because now we are not in the 18th century. Things are very much modified. The financial system of United States is breaking down. So it's very interesting what is going to happen the next weeks or months. And as a conclusion for Venezuela, because the military, with one exception, I saw that Delcy Rodriguez gave an order that one of the generals that had mission to defend Maduro have been arrested, isn't it?
I've seen
Because
the
he is considered a traitor.
yeah, I've seen the information. I tried to confirm it, but I haven't been able to confirm it yet. It's very likely that happened, but
All right,
I
yes.
haven't been able to confirm
But most of the leadership of the army of Venezuela
it intact.
and the political leadership is further on in Maduro's direction. I mean, the opposition has no chance to lead Venezuela for the moment, and Donald Trump is not able to impose Corina Machado or someone else because, as he himself admitted, they would not have any support from Venezuelan people. So it is obvious that this attempt of coup d'etat did not succeed. And with the support of Russia, China, BRICS, UN, um, things will not make a big change for Venezuela. What do you think about this?
Well, I think everybody that is in favor of multipolarity in the world will do everything they can in a coordinated fashion if they can, or individually if they have to ensure that that blockade does not succeed. That is to say that they stop preventing one country from trading with anybody they want, because sovereignty is at stake here. So, and the reason is, if the United States can get away by doing this to Venezuela, it can do it to anybody. They can organize a naval blockade. They can, surround the country, asphyxiate it, and then go in, extricate the president, and then say, if you don't do what we tell you, we'll bomb you. And that's exactly what is going on. It's so extreme that it cannot be sustained politically. So the question is, which one is going to go first? And I think there is an important point here to understand how things are going to go. The economy will not command the developments in the future. The economy will play an important role, but the key is going to be politics. That is to say, the oligarchy, regardless of economic conditions, the oligarchy in the United States, the ruling class in the world, specifically in the United States, regardless of economic conditions and economic processes, which are going against them every single time, will disregard that and will use political decisions to try to maintain their supremacy by military means. It's quite important because there is some illusions, it seems to me, in sections of the left believing that the economy itself is going to produce the result. No. The economy is going to contribute. This is a very important context. This is the actual material basis on which you apply politics. But politics is in command. And the United States has something very important to change the reality of the situation, which is a massive military apparatus. And that doesn't mean to say it's going to win, but it's going to, it's going to be very difficult for them, but it's going to be very difficult for the multipolarity to sort of do something about it. So let's see how this works. That's why I'm saying it is quite important what the Venezuelans have done, which is to apply a political strategy to isolate it and work within inside the United States with forces that do not want this. I think it can be done. So therefore, I remain optimistic. For as long as there is no splits in Venezuela, I think we have a very good chance. And so far, so good. And we outside have to do everything we can to support, by mobilizing, by influencing, regardless of what people think about something else. We do not put ideological conditions or preconditions for people to support and condemn what the United States has done to Venezuela. The bigger, the broader, the better, because that's the best way to isolate it. I think we have a very, very good chance because humanity will prevail over, this naked aggression and imperialism, which is so ugly and so disgusting.
Yes, I think all these measures made by United States and their allies are actually an example of desperation. because what they are doing to Venezuela and now they started to do for Russia by seizing their oil carriers, um, it doesn't works. I mean, all the mankind is already in multipolarity, and United States cannot be the world gendarme anymore. The currency financial system is already in BRICS hands. The dollar is going down. So their only chance, so-called chance, is to make another world war. But even in these conditions, I don't think they are going to win.
Yeah.
Of course, in a nuclear war, nobody wins. All the planet is destroyed. But I hope Donald Trump will have lucidity and moral responsibility to not make this step. We saw, and personal, I appreciated that he did not continue the politics of Biden regime with Ukraine. We, Romania, are at the border of Ukraine, and we could be very easily involved in a war in these conditions. But Donald Trump withdraw from this war, and I think he is smart enough to avoid military confrontation on a large scale. And if it's not going to be war, definitely the multipolarity will win.
Yes,
So
I agree. So, we remain hopeful, but particularly we remain active. That's the key. Let's move, let's organize, let's march, let's oppose, let's persuade people to do something about it. The more, the merrier, because there is a world we have to preserve.
And there is also a cognitive war, and that's why we are doing this kind of TV shows in order to spread the light to the truth. I mean, I told you in Romania, they are keep saying Maduro is a dictator, and Donald Trump wants to clean the situation with narco traffic networks, and we applaud what Donald Trump made. So this is disinformation. It's not objective. It's just propaganda. So, Mr. Francisco Dominguez, thank you very much for the very insightful information that you offered. We are very much needed to this kind of information, and we keep in touch with what is happening in Venezuela and in the world, and we will offer always the truth. So, thank you very much, and thank you for our audience. Keep in touch, and God help us.
That you invited me. I'm really pleased and honored to be here. But hopefully your audience found it useful. But count on me for future possible conversations. I'll be more than willing to do it. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Thank you too. Goodbye.
Goodbye.